Hello and welcome back to Pay Down Debt Solutions. For those of you that do not know me, I am Jen. And on this channel, we teach velocity banking. But not only do we teach velocity banking, we teach you how to get out of debt faster. Now, recently we've had a bunch of people inquire about their credit cards and learning how to defeat interest on their credit cards, how to pay their credit cards off faster. So I've spent some time, focusing on credit cards for you. And I have another student request today about their situation with a strategy that they would like me to run for them. So I'm going to run a hypothetical on some of her numbers because I don't know them all. There's a couple things I had to guess at, but we're still going to help her out based on an email that she sent us. And, we're going to do that for our students, just like we do that for all of you. Okay. Now, I want to talk to you today about the games that your credit card issuer plays. Okay. So these games, sometimes you think that your payment is great, or you think your interest rate is great. And then you find out after you watch a channel like ours here that maybe it's not such a good deal. And you're going to learn a little bit about your credit cards, how things are calculated, and how you can defeat the traditional banking way, how you can learn a different way to bank and defeat interest. Okay, so defeating interest is our first and foremost thing that we want to do, right? Because it is the interest over time that just kills you. When you realize you're paying $5,000 for a balance that you owe, but yet you're going to pay $7,000 in interest. It makes you sick when you really think about it. And most of you don't know that because you're not paying attention to things like that. Well, we're going to teach you guys how to kick the traditional banking system to the curb and start using your credit card as your checking account. And oh my God, I know that sounds really crazy, right? And it is for a lot of you. But you're going to breathe and you're going to be okay, because once you learn how this will affect you positively by defeating interest, you are going to change your mind, hopefully. And if not, I'm going to keep trying because we have plenty of videos out there that show you how to velocity bank. Now, the other game, okay, so number one, we're going to talk about these games that they play, right? There's two today that I'm going to focus on. Now, number one is payment calculation, okay? The game that they play with calculating your interest. How do they calculate it, and how is it affecting you today? Okay, so we're going to talk about this. So sometimes you have interest, right? We definitely have interest, and maybe our interest is at 19%. Okay, maybe it's 19%. Maybe it is at 24%. Our credit card is at 24%. Or maybe it is 29%. Or perhaps for a lot of you out there, you're sitting at 30%, because those are some common interests that we see right now. So maybe you're even at a 30% interest rate, all right? Now, your payment is calculated on an interest, okay, rate such as this, and then but then you have a payment to make, right? You have a payment on top of the interest to help, pay back that credit card. So that you might have a 19%, 24%, 29%, or 30%. In some cases, you guys have 32%, right? And then it's going to be plus 1%, 2%, 3%, 5%, okay? And so while all of these sound really bad to you, these are actually worse. If it's interest plus 0.75%, interest plus 0.5%, or interest plus 0.25%, which they are allowed to now go down to 0.25%. So while all of this sounds like this here would be better for you, I'm going to show you how maybe that is not as advantageous as you think. Game number two that they play. So these credit cards play a couple games, right? So the number two game that they play is the APR and the average daily balance. And then there's something called a daily periodic rate, okay? So APR, so the APR is what you're going to pay, right? The annual percentage rate, which a lot of times is right here, right? These percentages here. Now, credit cards are calculated on an average daily balance, and that is what we use in velocity banking when we're working your strategies, right? We love average daily balances, and they actually will work for us because it allows us to pay less over time, which I'll show you in my student scenario that I'm going to erase the board and run later, okay? So you've got your APRs, right? Your average percentage rate. You have your average daily balance. So your balance is calculated every single day, and then that average is what they calculate your payment on and your interest. Okay, so that's what you're going to be paying back. Now, there's also something called a daily periodic rate. And the daily periodic rate is something that you also need to know, okay? Because many of you out there are like, you know what? I don't need this velocity banking stuff. That's for the birds. I don't need that. I'm just going to pay an extra payment. Well, I'm going to show you how that extra payment might not actually be doing what you think it's doing. But today, let's first and foremost talk about the game number one, and that is how they calculate your interest and what that looks like for you, okay? And whether or not 1%, 2%, 3% is as bad as 0.75, 0.5, and 0.25%. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so how do banks calculate your payment? How do they do that? Well, we're going to take an example, and this is straight out of a student scenario that I have, not the one I'm going to be running today, but another one. So let's say your balance is $12,000, okay? And this credit card is awesome, right? Because it's at a 19% interest rate. So it's got this great rate for you. So it's at 19%. You've also got a $12,000 balance and it's at 24%. Okay, so we're going to calculate these at two different percentages, 19%, which is almost unheard of, right? And then we're also going to calculate it at 24%, which is becoming unheard of. That was actually the average, I think, in 2023 of credit card interest rates. Now that continues to creep up and we're seeing higher and higher interest rates. But we're going to use these today as our example, okay? So now, if we have a $12,000 balance and it's at 19%, let's say that our credit card company is charging us interest plus 1%, okay? Like these over here, 1%, 2%, 3%, 5%. And then let's say the other option for this same card, remember, I like to compare apples to apples, right? So we're using the same amount, right? And we're also going to be using the same interest rate, but the percent back, okay, the percent that you owe that will go and pay down your balance, right, is going to be different. And so here, you're paying interest plus 1% every month. And over here, you're also paying interest plus a percentage, but it's 0.5% instead of 1%. So when you look at that and you say, okay, well, I definitely want to pay $130 or $310 versus my $250, right? Because monthly, that's going to look better for you and that's going to alleviate some pressure, right? So you're going to probably choose the $250 a month, right? But let's take a look at the inner workings of this card and what happens to you and what these banks do for you. You think you're getting a deal paying the $250, right? Versus the $310. Well, let's take a look at that. Let's see what happens here. So if we have 12,000, and I'm going to get my handy dandy super old calculator here, and we have 12,000, and let's say we know it's at 19%. Okay, so we're going to calculate what we're being charged for the year in interest. No, okay. And so what I'm being charged for the year is 2,280. Okay, so if I take my 12,000, and you guys can all do this with me, and I multiply by 0.19, that's going to equal the 2280, just like I showed you, okay? And then we take that and we're going to divide it by 12, and that equals 190, okay? So 190 is the interest that I am paying monthly if my balance is at $12,000, okay? So that is the interest that I'm going to pay a month. So if I'm paying my interest is at is 190, so this is my interest payment at 19%. Now we know that our balance then, to pay down our balance, the credit card is going to charge us 1% on top of that, okay? And that's supposed to go towards my balance. So if I have 12,000, again, we take our 12,000 and we're going to multiply that by 0.01, we are going to get $120. So that means we take our interest, okay, divided by 12, because this is for the month. We take our month of 190 and we take our 1% interest, a rate of 120. You don't divide that by 12, by the way. It's just left at the 120. You add them together and you're going to get $310. That would be the amount that you pay, okay? So now we have this credit card and the credit card company says, we're going to do you such a great favor. We're going to give you interest plus 0.5%. That's what your payment is going to be calculated on. And you say, yay, that's great. I'm excited about that, right? So now we have the same interest, right? $190, because that's not changed, right? Our balance hasn't changed. And when you divide the 2280 by 12, it's still going to be 190, right? But what has changed is how we're calculating the percentage, right? So now in the last scenario, I've got 12,000, right? So 12,000. I'm going to multiply that by 0.005, which is going to equal what? Okay, so we take 12,000, whoops, not 120, 12,000, and we multiply that by 0.005, and that is going to equal $60. So that is 60, right? So it's going to be $60, which would make sense, right? Wouldn't it? Because if it's at 1%, it's 120. And if it's at 0.5%, it's half of 120, which is 60, okay? So if we do that, we've got 60 plus our 190, which equals our 250, right? So 250, okay? So that was the 190, right? So 190 plus the 60, right? Plus the 60 equals 250, okay? So 250. So now we have our 310 here, interest in 1%, and we have interest in 0.5%. 250 is our payment on that. But if you take a look at this payment, okay, and you say, all right, well, what is my payment percentage, right? So what is the percentage of interest per payment that I'm making, all right? Well, what you're going to do is you're going to take your interest rate at the 19%, right? So which is our 190, so that's what we're paying, okay, a month is 190, and you're going to divide it by the 310. So 190 divided by 310 equals 0.61, so 61%. So when I'm making this payment, okay, the 310, I am paying an interest. 61% of that payment is going to interest. Okay, that's all well and good. So now let's look at it. If it's my payment is 250. Well, what hasn't changed here? The interest that the bank is going to get, right? That has not changed. But the amount that is going to go to your principal certainly has, right? So if you take your 190 and you're going to then divide that 190 by our 250, what does that equal? 76%, right? So we know that this payment here, and let me find a eraser here. So we know that this payment here at 250, that means that even though I'm paying less, I'm actually paying more in interest, right? The greater percentage of that payment is going to interest. So in this case, if that payback amount, okay, is $7,000, let's say our amount, hold on, I think I have that for you guys. Actually, let me find out. I think I wrote it down. So let's see here. And I did. Okay, so at 19% at the 1% payment, that means that it'll take 5 years and 1 month to pay it back. And the dollar amount that you're going to pay back is $4,000. Okay, so $4,407. Okay, so $4,407. All right, that is what you're going to pay back if your payment is 310 and it's at 1%. So just think, if it's going to at the 1% be $4,000, you could probably double that, right? And know that you're going to pay $8,000 by paying 0.5% versus the 1%. Plus there's compounding in there, so it's actually probably going to be more. So when you guys start looking at your statements and you see these low payments and you're wondering why you can't pay back your card with any significant damage made when you make your payment, right? Your balance certainly doesn't drop by much. This is why, you guys, because you're not paying back very much, are you? All right. So let's take it then. Let's take a look at our 24%. Okay. So if we take our 12,000, so we're going to take our 12,000, we're going to multiply it by 0.24. So that's going to be let's see. So 2880. All right. And let me just do it again, make sure I did that right. So 12,000 times 0.24 equals 2880. And it does. But then we have to divide that by 12, right? Okay, so divide that by 12, which means our payment is $240. Okay, so our payment is $240. All right, that's our payment here. That's the interest here. Okay, is $240. Now we have to calculate it at 1% though. So again, the 12,000 times our let's see, 0.01 equals 120, right? Because that hasn't changed. So 120. All right, so if we add these together, so we know 360, right? So 360 is going to be our payment. Well, if our payment is 360, okay, so we know that that is our interest in 1% payment. Now let's calculate it then. Again, the same thing, right? But this time we're going to do it at our 0.5, okay? So we've got our interest and our 1%. So now we're going to calculate it at our 0.005, right? And we're going to find out what that is. So 360 at 1%, now we know that it's going to be roughly the same thing, right? $60. So if we take that and we take 120, so I'm sorry, 240. So we'll take 240. So we've got our 240, right? Plus 60, right? So now we have, let's see, right, 300, right? So 240 plus 60 is 300 versus the 360. So that means when you take a look at this and you calculate it again on the same way to figure out what your percentage is going to be. So then we're going to do the same thing. So we take our 240, right? So we take our 240 and we're going to then divide it by our 360. And we're going to figure out how much of our payment that is. And over here, we're going to take our 240, right? And divide it by the 300. Okay, so let's figure out what that is. So 240 divided by 360 equals, okay, so this is going to be 66% of our payment then, right, is going to interest. And over here, 240 divided by 300, that means 80%, okay? So 80% is going to go to interest when you have less than 1% here. And in this case, it's 0.5%. So you guys, when you look at your finances and you think you've got this lower payment and it's, helps you breathe, it is doing you no favors when you look at the inner workings, right? The games that these credit card companies play. When you look at the inner workings of that card and you realize how much that that 0.5% is doing for you, or should I say not doing for you, when you know that 80% of this payment now is going to interest and a very small amount then is actually going to work down your principal. Okay, so similarly, they play other games too, right? So the other games that they play, number 2, we talked about the APR, your annual percentage rate, which is up here, 19%, right? And then we've got 24%. And then we've got our average daily balance. Now, the average daily balance, again, that is what your bank calculates all these revolving lines of credit on. And so the average daily balance is an awesome thing when you look at the fact that we can put our income into these cards and drop our average daily balance, which means our interest rate is going to be lower. That is how things work with Velocity Banking. But when you take a look at this and you say, okay, I'm traditionally banking right now, and I'm just going to throw any extra money I have on my credit card, right? So you might be wanting to do that. And there's lots of people that do that. Well, let's see what happens when you do that, okay? So if you have $190 is the interest, okay? So my example up here, 190 is our interest payment, okay? There's something called a daily periodic rate. So that's the rate that you're charged daily, okay? So if you calculate that and we turn it into dollars, let's say, for example, we want to put an extra $25 on this card, okay? So we're just going to throw an extra $25 on that card. Well, what does that do for you, okay? What does it do? What does it do for your card? How does that work for you? Well, you have to look at this. If we are paying $190 for the month, okay? Now, remember, we've got statement periods here, right? So when your statement cuts, okay, it might be the 1st to the 30th, maybe it's the 15th to the 15th, and then they cut your statement and then they say, this is what you owe, right? And then you're given a dollar amount. Well, if we know that our interest is $190 that we're paying for 30 days, okay, and we divide that out daily, okay, to figure out what our daily rate is. So basically, you're going to take $190 and you're going to divide by 30 days, right? So if I do that, I come up with 6.3, okay? So if I take, again, I'll show you 190, okay, 190. There's my 190, and then I'm going to divide it by 30 for 30 days in the month. That gives me the 6.3, okay? So that means every day, and we're just going to round it, and well, we'll just round it at 6, okay? So we'll say every day I'm paying $6 in interest, okay? So if I'm paying $6 in interest every month, okay, it's actually, we know it's a little bit more than that. So each day I'm paying $6, right? Well, I'm going to throw $25 on my principal, right? I'm going to throw it on this card. I'm going to throw it on my principal. Well, you can't throw it on your principal with a credit card, can you? Because that's not how they work. You make a payment to the card and it's divided up, right? You make a payment, it's divided up, and that it is what it is. And that is partially because of the average daily balance, which can work for us in our favor when we do velocity banking. But when you traditionally bank, it does not really do you favors. And here's why. So my statement period cuts, and I say maybe 7 days in, I decide I have extra $25 and I'm going to throw this in. I'm going to throw in $25 on day 7. Well, so day 1, I've paid $6, right? There's $6. Day 2, I pay $6 again. So day 2, I'm at $12, okay? Day 3, I'm at what? $18. Day 4, I'm at what? 24, right? And how am I doing that? Well, obviously 6, 12, 18, 24, right? Then what? All right, so if we take 6, 12, 18, 24, remember and I just forgot about how much we were going to put in there. So it's $25, right? We said we were going to put $25. So what happens on day 1, 2, 3, 4? $24 is charged in interest, right? But I'm going to put $25 extra onto my card. So what have I just done? I have essentially fed the bank some more interest, haven't I? When you think about it, you've actually fed the bank more interest because you waited till the 4th day or maybe 5th day or maybe 7th day. So if it was 7 days, right? So at day 7, I'm going to be at $42, right? In interest. Okay. And if I subtract then 25 from that, that means I have $17 in interest that is left. So when you throw in extra money, right, you make extra, payments to these cards, you have to look at the daily periodic rate to know what you're being charged. Because if I'm going to throw in $25 on day 7, it's already been eaten up in interest. If I'm going to put more money on that card, the only time I need to do that is when that statement period cuts, right? Because then the extra 25 actually works down that principal. Otherwise, I'm just feeding the interest machine, and then that turns into more principal that I owe down the road. So you guys, you have to know how these credit cards work, especially if you are running your banking through traditional banking. So what we propose and what this channel is all about is for you to learn velocity banking. So I'm going to show you a student scenario today, where I had a student who wants to know what she needs to do with her money and how she should allocate it because she wants to do a split card strategy. And let's look at that and see how velocity banking can help us in a situation very similar to this. Okay, so I've already told you the games they play, right? So there's the daily periodic rate, which when you do traditional banking and you think you're going to throw in some extra money, depending on when you throw in that extra money, is going to determine whether or not you're actually helping to reduce your balance or not. So you know that the minute that statement cuts is when you want to put in that extra money. Otherwise, you're just giving away interest to the bank. You're literally doing nothing when you throw extra money at these credit cards when you do traditional banking. Now, we also know that depending on whether it's 1%, 5%, or 0.5%, or whatever the calculation is that they do, is also going to determine how much the bank then continues to feed itself in interest and how little then you're throwing towards principal. Now, when you are traditionally banking, such as many of you are, and you are continuing to be in this vicious cycle, right? Over and over and over again, you're doing it every single day. It is literally the definition of madness. There is no magic in that, but there is magic in velocity banking. And there's magic in velocity banking because of your average daily balance, because you're putting in your interest and you're putting in your income and you're dropping your balances dramatically, reducing the average daily balance, which is magic monthly, adding gentle interest charges, right? Versus putting your regular payments, making your regular payments, and not working down your balances by putting in your income into these accounts. Now, you can have one debt destroyer, and that is what we call these credit cards when run the correct way. They go from a credit card, an average credit card that is just eating you alive, into this wonderful debt destroyer when you do what I propose, which is velocity banking. Now, this student of ours who's been watching some videos, she has seen the split card strategy before, and she wanted to know if she was doing this correctly and if she was working at it and moving in the right direction. So I'm going to take her numbers, those that I know at this point, and I'm going to work them out with you. Now, a couple things I don't know, so I'm going to just infer and plug in some numbers just because that would make it a little bit more accurate, right? So first of all, I'm not 100%, I know what her monthly payment is, but I wasn't sure what the credit card is. So we're giving her two credit card amounts. One is going to be $4,275. The other is going to be $2,500. And I have calculated this on an interest and 1%. Now it could be that she is interest in 0.5% or interest in 0.25%. I don't know at this point, but regardless, velocity banking is going to work for her in this situation, okay? So if her income is at $1,408 monthly and her total expenses sit at $1,113 monthly, that means she has a cash flow of $295. So good for her. She does have a positive cash flow, which helps this situation out dramatically. So let's say, and again, this is part of my hypothetical here, is her rent. Let's say it's at $100 or $630, because I really don't know. All right. So we're going to show you guys, I want to show you some non-chargeables, because when you're working with credit cards, there are certain things that are not chargeable. Okay. So those we have to hold out of both of our expenses and our income, because we have to pay them through the traditional banking system, unfortunately. Okay. So not all of your income when you're working with credit cards can go into your card. There are certain things you have to hold out. Now, when you're working with something like a personal line of credit or a home equity line of credit, all of your income can go in, but that is for another video. So we are going to then know that we have to hold out some stuff here, and I will talk about that. So let's say the Chase card is at $4,275. Her payment is $142. That means the interest rate that she is being charged is at 28%. That I do know. I do know the payment. I do know the interest rate. So I'm guessing if I do an interest in 1%, that it's going to be about 4.6 years to pay this back. And she will have to pay back $3,166 for that Chase card. Now, Capital One, if it is at a $2,500 balance and her payment is $81 a month and it is at 27%, these two I do know again. And if it's calculated interest plus 1%, that means it's 4.5 years to pay that back. So that means she will then owe, after 4 years, at 4.5 years, she's going to owe $1,804 on $2,500 borrowed, which means that a total amount of $4,970 is then going to be owed in just interest alone. Remember, she has borrowed $6,775. She's going to owe $4,970, which is almost $5,000. Okay. So what are her options? So she sent me some of her bills here. Okay. And so not her bills. Well, yes, they are bills, but we'll call them living expenses at this point, because we know that if she has rent at $360, and we're going to just assume she doesn't have a car for the moment, her rent is at $360. And her TV is $15, her food is $150, her internet is $35, and her gas is $60. Again, numbers that she gave me. Means that $260 are out of what she owes, right? Are living expenses. Okay, so these are part of her living expenses. Again, her rent is $630. So here's how we have to figure things. Okay, we have an available income that we have to figure. Okay. Right now, her income stands at $1,408, but she has rent, which cannot be charged, right? Rent cannot be charged through a credit card. So she has to hold that out and leave it in her checking account. Now, I would normally have to pull out the $142 and the $81. However, we are using them as debt destroyers. We have two cards. We're doing a split card strategy. We're using them as debt destroyers. So that means that we don't have to hold those out of her income, because she can actually use those as part of her income, because when we put more income into our cards, those payments are not owed because they are satisfied, okay, by putting in the income, which is well above and beyond what that payment is, okay? So, and you're going to see this in a minute. So we don't have to calculate the 142 and the 81 into our income. We don't have to take it out, I should say, of our income. We can leave it in our income knowing that we're going to be using it for these cards. Now, chargeable expenses. If she owes $1,113, okay, every month in total expenses, we then have to hold out her rent, right? Because that has to be paid through the checking. We know that $142 is a non-chargeable expense, right? So non-chargeables are coming out. And the $81 is also a non-chargeable expense, so we can't charge that. And so that means that if we start with the 100 or 1,113, we subtract out the rent, we subtract out both cards. That means our chargeable expenses are $260, right? So she told me that she was thinking she was going to split them up and do $165 on this card and about $95 on this card. Okay, so she's going to pay for internet and gas on the Capital One and the TV and food then on the Chase card. And she could do that because they add up to the $260. Okay, and that's exactly what we're showing here, right? 65 and 95. Now, we're going to take care of our income. We're going to look at our income and decide how we need to split the income out, though, right? Because we know one card is a little bit more, we owe a little bit more on one card versus the other. So we want to reflect that in our in our income as well. And we want to put the more income onto the card that is, a higher balance, and less income on the card that is less of a balance, okay? So if this is at 28% interest and this is 27% interest, we start with our cards, okay? We then split up our income. Now, if I add those two together, so you know exactly where I'm getting these. So if I take 489 and I add 289, it's going to equal 778, which is exactly this here, okay? That's the available income. And if I take the 165, although I proved it over here, and I add the 95, that is equal to 260, which is right here, okay? So if we do this and we run these cards, okay, the next thing we have to do is figure the interest, because the interest comes into play here, because if this interest that I'm putting on this card is more than my income, I've got a problem, right? It's not going to work. My strategy is not going to work. Or if this is more than my expenses, I should say, it's not going to work. Same thing here. If it's more than my expenses, this isn't going to work. Now, how do I calculate my interest? Well, I'm going to take my $42.75 and I am going to then add it to my low balance. So what you do, remember, average daily balance. The best way we can calculate this for the month is by taking our high balance and adding it to our low balance and dividing it by 2. So $42.75, we're then going to add the $37.86, which equals $8,061. We divide that by 2, which equals $40.30. Now, we have to divide that by 12, though. And if we have to divide that by 12, whoops, I have to redo these numbers, because we know that we have to take an average, okay? And so the average between the average then is divided by 12. So I'm sorry, hold on. 42.75 plus 37.86 equals 80.61 divided by 2 is 40.30. And then we multiply that by 0.28, which equals 1,000. What is that? 1,028. I can't read backwards. All right. So I skipped a step there. So I forgot to then multiply it by, remember, the 0.28%. Okay. So that is 1128. And then we take that now and divide it by 12, which equals our 94. Okay. So that's our 94. So to recap, because I screwed up, we take 42.75, we add the 37.86, okay? So 42.75 plus the 37.86 equals 80.61. Again, we take 80.61, divide that by 2 to get the 40.30. And then the step I forgot was we had to multiply that by the 0.28, which gives us 11.28. And then we take that and we're going to divide that by 12 to give us the 94, okay? So you're going to do the same thing on this side, right? You take the 2,500 plus the 2211, divide by 2, multiply by 0.27, divide that by 12 to get the 52. Now, she is going to then do this every single month until these cards are paid off. Well, over here, traditionally banking, it's going to take 4 years and 6 months and 4 years and 5 months to get to the balance of, and pay an interest of 3,166 and to pay 1,804, which means total in 4.5 years, she's going to pay 4,970. So what happens when she runs it with Velocity Banking? What happens when we use our revolving lines of credit as debt destroyers? What happens? Here's what happens. So we then go on this card here, our Chase card. It takes us 15 months to run this down to 0. And we're going to spend $777, okay, in interest. That's what we're paying in interest versus, right, 3166. Now over here, as you can imagine, it's going to be even less. So here's what we have. It takes 14 months, and it's $416 is the amount that we owe, 416. So when you add those together, it is $1,193 we're paying in interest over, what, a year and a couple months versus 4.5, 4.6 years? This is why we do Velocity Banking. This is why we're teaching you guys every single day how to run Velocity Banking strategies. We have tons of videos out there that you guys can watch this. If you have questions, please leave us comments. We're always interested in what you have to say. We're always trying to help. And like this student here, we're just throwing some numbers out there to help her out because she had a situation where she was on the right track and I wanted to prove it to her. So far, so good. So if most of this remains the same, she is in great shape. Have a great day, you guys, and we will see you in the next video.